So, is this a landscape? That's the first question that we ask. You can have your own opinion. I think it is. It's a small scale one, but I think it is a landscape. The important things for me are that it's got the natural factors, so it's a floodplain, it's not going to be easily built on, so that's why it still persists even though it's on the fringe of the city. And it's got the vegetation and the habitats that go along with that mean it's been protected as a nature reserve. But it's also got the human influence. It's got the elements that have been added to it to allow for recreation, things like the path and the boardwalk and the gates and so on, information boards too. And it's got managed elements like the ditches, the poplar trees and so on. So that combination of physical and cultural factors, to me, makes it a landscape. Out of the physical and cultural factors, I'd say probably the cultural has become the more important now. It is managed for landscape. The landscape would not look the same without that particular kind of management. In particular, the grazing of cattle leads to the open landscape that you can see. Without that cultural value placed on that ecosystem, this would look quite different. Is it attractive? That's in the eye of the beholder. It's quite a lovely thing to have fairly close to your house. I certainly appreciate it. I wouldn't say it's beautiful. It's not breathtaking by any sense of the word, but it is a nice place to be. Water does always add to aesthetics to some extent. Usually people rate a place as being more beautiful if it has water, and obviously this has that. Just to look at, as well as in this case you are able to interact with it, to swim and paddle and so on, and I think that does add some aesthetic value to the site. So it's attractive. I wouldn't go as far as beautiful, but yeah, attractive. What does it do for the people of Norwich? Well, keep going on about recreation, but you can't escape that. The number of people that I've seen on this walk around today certainly shows the recreational value that it holds. And you can also look through the ecosystem services side of things to consider what else it gives us. You know, it gives us oxygen, it gives us shade, it gives us biodiversity, all kinds of additional features. Some productivity. I guess you could say the cattle on the marsh are productive. They will be sold for beef at some point, things like blackberries and so on. But for the most part, it's a recreational landscape now. In terms of the changes in the past, well, you can see some evidence of that. I've talked about more recent changes like the path, the poplars and so on. There is the railway line behind me. I keep expecting to get interrupted by a train at pretty much any point. That was in the mid-19th century, so it's seen changes across a range of history. I haven't been able to find out too much about more distant history, but now, because it's a nature reserve, it is kind of preserved. In terms of thinking about the future challenges for this landscape, I've mentioned that some aspects of it are maintained under agri-environment schemes. So we have to consider what might happen in the future if they are no longer available, if payments are reduced, something like that. We have to consider population pressures around us. I mentioned the development possibly happening over that side of the site with the new industrial estate and so on. What's that going to do? Probably not much in terms of people. It's a relatively small part of the view, but it's just general gradual encroachment on the site. More people are getting outside, more people are enjoying the natural environment. There's potentially pressure on the environment just from numbers of people, and as numbers of people increase, you're always going to get potential for misuse of a site. We saw a little hint of that at the river, at the video that I recorded earlier on. So that's maybe a threat, sort of vandalism and general misuse and spoiling of the site for others. And then climate change. Everywhere's got to get to grips with climate change. At some point we've got to think about changes in river function, in river levels. Is this going to flood more often in the winter? Is it going to be feasible to keep grazing the cattle on here? There was a very wet year a few years back where they had to take them off. They weren't really able to graze as much of the year as they would usually do. So yeah, and we're thinking about drier summers. Is there more of a fire risk, especially if you have public access? This site is not by any stretch of the imagination closed at night. It's accessible 24 hours a day, and obviously any site that's like that does potentially attract more nefarious use. So lots of different challenges around this site to contend with in the future. So that's my introduction, that's my little virtual field trip. I really hope you can get out and think about a site that you know well, maybe one that's close to your home. I don't expect anybody else to do a video. If you want to send me one, that would be lovely. But have a think, see how you think it holds up in terms of being a landscape, functioning, what does it provide for people around it, what influences can you see, what signs of its past history, its management and so on can you find, and how would you interpret it as a landscape. Thanks very much for your attention. Look forward to hearing your thoughts as we go in the module.